Hi everyone, this is Tanya from Flying Dog Studio. Thank you so much for joining me as I attempt to apply Beatrix Potter's art technique to my own reference photo and art. As you can see, we're starting off with some wild blackberries. I've already pre-drawn this and I'm just knocking back the lines a little bit. We don't want to knock them back too much because this is not going to be a piece that I am inking. If you didn't catch my last video, that was also a piece that I did not ink because it was one of her pieces that I was working on. So we're going to do the same with this one. And you can see I have a microfiber cloth. I'm using a complete Winsor Newton products as far as paints and brushes go. I'm also going to be using a Derwent Inktense pencil because, as the title implies, we are not going to be doing any tea on this piece. So I have my Winsor & Newton paints, I have a size 6 round, and I have then my flat brush. I believe that's a 1/2 inch flat brush so that we can spread the color on here. I'm starting out with Baked Earth on this Derwent Inktense pencil. One of you, and I will list you down in the comments and tag you in this, you talked about how you make your own quote tea with Inktense pencils, and I thought that was a really good idea because someone else asked, isn't the acidity of the tea, won't that make it like deteriorate the piece over time? And the answer to that, I feel quite certain, is yes. You know, we're always looking for acid-free paper and tape and mats and everything else associated with art and preserving art. So yes, but it's not, I'm not selling these pieces. They're simply for demonstration for you guys. So I didn't worry about it too much, but I thought, you know, it's a good idea to explore other things for those of you that want to sell your art or keep your pieces for posterity. So I have used a very, very light touch when putting this Baked Earth pencil on top. And if you've never used Derwent Inktense, they are very intense, as the name implies, and they are ink, as the name implies. So once it is on the paper, it is on the paper. So I just did one wash of that. It was a lot quicker than tea. I went ahead and taped it down. Don't normally tape my work, but I didn't want my paper to wrinkle. Now this is 100% cotton paper, 140-pound paper. I will link that down below. There's a comparison for you. That was a piece that had been done with a tea wash, and this is the one that is not. Now if you want to freeze your screen, these are the colors we're going to be using. I'll still have them on the screen, but I wanted you to see that I had mapped the colors before I started. So let's get started. Now the colors are going to come quickly on this. It's a long video, so I had to cut out some of the color mixing. So we're starting out with a little yellow, a little red, and we're going to start with the berries because I know it would make sense to start with the leaves since they're behind the berries, but I'm a person that has ADHD and the berries appealed to me and I couldn't wait. So we're starting with the berries. I'm going to be getting a light wash on here, just a simple light wash on the berries. And this is why I did not knock my pencil lines back too much, only a little bit. We can't lean on the inking. So we're going to have to make certain that those pencil lines are going to show through. Now, if you are going to do this with me and follow along, I will have this up on my blog and the link will be down below. And there you will find a drawing of this piece that I will do in Procreate. So you will have a nice clean line drawing that you can trace or download and print on your own watercolor paper, however you want to do that. What you see here is I do have a Winsor lemon. I wanted to point that out. It is in the center. I'm going to use that to brighten up colors as need be because I realized looking at the color chart that I had mapped that I was going to need some brighter colors just in case, because this was taken probably about 6 in the evening and the sun was just starting to set. So we had some nice shadows and some nice light, and I wanted to be able to depict that on here. So the addition of the Winsor lemon was necessary. You are going to find a spoiler alert later on in the video that I find it necessary to add a color I hardly ever use, and that is ivory black. I never use that for shadows, and I will say that if I'm going to use, I've said it before, if I'm going to use black, it's for a specific color mixing purpose, and that's what we're going to have on here. I'm going to need it to make some of these greens a little bit darker for the shadows. So I'm going to be quiet here as I'm adding on these different layers, and I'll let you just watch this process. I'm going to hop back on because those berries are going to take about 3 or 4. I cannot remember. You can count on here and let me know. And the end, if you want to let me know in the comments how many layers they actually took. I thought this would be a nice quick little piece to show you, but those berries were a killer. So again, I'm going to hop off and I'll hop back on in a minute and we'll talk some more. I think this is a good point to hop on and let you know a few things about my working conditions here. I am working at a desk in front of a window, so what you are seeing is natural light. I'm working about 3 o'clock in the afternoon and my window is facing south, so I'm getting some good light in. But this is the South, and I particularly like to work with the window open. I don't know why. I like fresh air even in the wintertime, but that does change the drying time on my watercolors. So what you're seeing, the leaf I'm working on right now, the one just under it, that larger leaf that I was working on, you'll see spots where the colors look almost juxtapositioned together, as if the color had dried before I could get the other color on. And that's exactly what it did in that short amount of time. And I know I paint slowly, but in that short amount of time, with the warm breeze blowing in, and the sun coming in, it dried fairly quickly. So I thought, you know, I'm really going to have to work here. So I took a little break after I did that leaf because I am physically challenged with arthritis and fibromyalgia. So I took a little break, came back and thought, you know, I'm going to have to work a little bit faster. I can't shut the window because mentally I feel like I have to have that open. So you will see me, even though I am doing a Beatrix Potter technique where she does what I have called, if you've watched my videos before, if you haven't, I will link that down below so you can catch up on those, but I feel as if she uses a dry brushing technique. So the only water I'm really going to be using is what's in that palette where I've pre-mixed the colors. I'm not going to be going back and forth and getting water on my brush and making a lot of really wet washes on here. I'm going to use the water that is on the palette. The only time I touch the water is to rinse the color off, and then you'll see me dry it over on that cloth and then come back and do some more painting straight from the palette. However, because I have the window open, I do in a couple of areas have to hit that water and soften the edges and reactivate the edges of some of the color so that I can drop color back in. So it will blend together and get that technique that she used with dropping wet colors side by side and letting them blend together. And that's the effect that I wanted. So you'll see that throughout the video. At this point, the piece has completely dried and it's time to put a more defining layer on the berries. And you'll see that I have a purple, a deep purple, and a deep red, and I'm going to be going back and forth on those. One thing I want you to notice, first of all, I started and I thought, I think I'm going to save some spot for the highlights. And I thought there are so many spots and this is so small. Forget that idea. We'll fill it in and I'll come back later and use some gouache. So I'm going to be using some gouache at the end, some that my daughter had, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But I want you to notice that I'm doing one little berry section at a time, one of those little ovals, one of those little juice pockets, I don't know what they're called, but one of those little areas at a time. I am still doing that technique where I will put part of the color down in the darker area and then pick up that lighter color and drop it in and just let them blend together on the paper. And you can see those are my highlight spots, but we're gonna get rid of some of those in just a few minutes. But if I go over the entire berry and don't take it one little berry section at a time, then I'm going to just have a big mess, and I'm not going to be able to define those berries. They're still going to run together. I'm not skipping around like I would to make sure one berry's dry and then go to another little section and going back and forth. Instead, I'm going to go ahead and let them run together because I know I'm going to come back in successive layers and redefine only certain areas. I'm not wanting to trace around these little circles. I'm not wanting them to be a hard edge. I'm wanting them to have shadows. So this is how we're going to do it, one little berry section at a time. In addition to the line drawing up on my blog, I will also include the reference photo of this piece, and you will see that this berry in the foreground that's closer to us, it is giving us a perspective of foreshortening. It looks so much larger than the other berries, and they were all the same size. It was also because of the camera on the phone, it was a little bit out of focus. So I'm going to compensate for that at the end. If you want to follow along and paint your own version of this berry, you may want to leave it out of focus. That's entirely up to you. Now you can see we're coming back. Like I said, I'm not wanting to trace around. I'm looking for the darkest area of shadow. I am using very little water. It looks like there's a lot of water over there on the palette, but when I pick it up and come back over, you'll see that there's not a lot of water. That keeps it from spreading out on me. And again, these berries are completely dry. You can also see at this point why I didn't want to knock back the pencil lines completely. Many times when I am doing watercolor and I'm not tracing over it with a pen and I'm just relying on the pencil lines, I'm a person, it's okay in watercolor, it's quite acceptable to have the pencil lines show, but I'm a person that if it's going to look more realistic, I don't want a lot of lines showing. In this case, I needed those lines because I knew the berries were going to be dark, so I was going to need to keep those lines in there so I could see them once I added those dark colors on. And that berry in the front that I was talking about, you can see it really pays off there because you can see the little pencil lines underneath, and it's going to also help us to define those berries in the end. So I'm going to keep on here, and I'm using the same shade of purple, that deep purple, but when we layer one color on top of another, if you're new to watercolor, it's called glazing or it's called layering. I call it layering. Some artists call it glazing. But when you layer the same color on top of a dry color, then you're going to get a darker shade of that color. So that's what we're doing here. I'm just going to be going back and forth. I'm going to be doing some color correcting, and I'm going to be adding in those shadows. As we're starting on the leaves here, I did want to mention, as you can see, I am trying to save some areas for the veins. And if you take a look at the piece I did previously to this, the video previous to this, where I was doing one of Miss Potter's pieces, she doesn't necessarily put veins in her pieces. And I think when you do see this style of work from her where she is not inking it and you see any type of vein, you are seeing the pencil marks being picked up underneath. And I started doing some spaces, leaving some spaces for those veins in there, and realized, this is not exactly what I picked up from her style. So instead of adding in my style subconsciously, I went back to doing what she did, which is putting those colors together and letting them run together. So I can still see the veins in that leaf. And again, it was drying pretty quickly. So that kind of helped to add those in, but they went ahead and meshed together with the wet edges, and that is what I wanted on there. Now you can see I have added in some black. I used the black ivory and the yellow together, and that gave me an entirely different kind of green. One thing I always enjoy doing when I taught kids was to give them yellow and black and tell them to make green, and they always looked at me like I was crazy, but it made a lovely swamp green, and that's what we needed for some of the shadows on the stems. And we are going to use that on some of the ends of the leaves, because when you layer it, depending on what's underneath, it's going to give you a different effect. Now at this point, I am adding the green on. This green was fine on the previous leaf that I used, but on this one, that darker green is just not cutting it. And I realize you'll see hesitation in my touching the paint. And at this point, I'm realizing I'm going to need to add some black in to this. So that's what I'm doing. And I'm testing it here. And it's more of a forest green, but because there are colors underneath, this may be what I need, and I'm going to try it out. It's still a little too blue-green. It's not exactly the color I need, but I'm going to go ahead and finish this because I've committed to it. So I'm going to have to finish it and drop these colors in. And then I'm going to come back and add a little more black into that green on the palette, that blue-green on the palette, because it's not matching up with my shadows. It's not giving me the exact shade of green that I need, but I'm going to go ahead and use it on some of these areas and then add a little more black to it so that I can bring it into that tone that I'm needing to show the shadows. And we're going to test it again here a little bit more, and that's what I need. It has almost a blue tint to it now, and I probably could have used the Payne's Gray, but since black is what I had on the palette mapping at the beginning, I decided I would just stick with that. Now this looks kind of dark, but remember, when we put the colors down, they're going to dry lighter. So I'm okay with that. This has already dried quite a bit, so I'm okay with coming back and painting on the top. And now I'm satisfied with the shade of green that I have because it is communicating shadows on here. So you're going to keep on adding these layers on, and then we'll go back to the berries again. a few finishing touches there on the leaves and the stems, and then we're gonna hop back over to the berries. So I, once again, am making all of my berry colors here, because remember, when we layer it on top, that layer is dry, we can layer the same color and it's going to be darker. I'm mixing it with my size 6 round, but I do have in my arsenal the watercolors that you see there that I have, the Winsor Newton. That was a travel set, and with that travel set came this tiny little travel brush. I'm really going to have to look into getting a larger handle brush because I didn't think I would like the tiny brushes. I generally don't, but they do come in handy for things like this. And again, I don't have a lot of water in that palette, and using this tiny brush, I'm looking at the shadows between the berries. We're not going to trace around each berry. We want the viewer to move through the berries. We don't want to close it completely in. And I'm just looking at some of the berries that go around the back. If you've ever seen blackberries before, they start out red and then they slowly turn to that blackberry color. And some of these berries, because of shadows and because they were turning darker as the berries go around, I'll have some edges that are completely black almost. And that is, I shouldn't say black, I should say purple. It's kind of a purple black color. They are really that dark color because they have turned and because they have shadows. And I'll be switching back and forth between the red and the purple, and in some instances I'll put both on together to get the entire roundness effect on those berries. trying to add a little more detail to that berry that was fuzzed out on there from the photograph. And then we're going to go back to putting a little bit of detail on those leaves. With such dark color and such shadows, you do lose some of that pencil underneath. And I thought, you know, I know it's not typical of her work, but I'm going to come back and try to add a few of the veins in. So I'm mixing things up with my size 6 round, and then I'm going to switch back to that size. Well, I didn't tell you earlier, but that little travel brush I think is probably a size 2 round. And again, that's a Winsor Newton. And I'm going to try to add some of those veins in, because one thing, and this is why I told myself it was okay to do this, because I'm trying to emulate her art here and her technique, because Miss Potter did almost draw, and I wanted to show you here. See how that's flat, and I'll explain that in just a second. One thing that Miss Potter did do was almost draw with her brush, and so I said, this is okay. I can add a few of these dark areas in that I can't get with just juxtapositioning the color or allowing it to blend together. Now what I did in order to create that flatness on my brush, I got the paint on there, and then I tuck one side of the brush on my towel and put a finger on the other side and pulled them together, and that gave me a flat edge. So if you're ever painting and you get outside your lines just a little bit, or it's a little bit shaky, just do that with your brush. And as you can see, I'm doing that here, and it allows you to feather stuff out, and it allows you to get a nice sharp edge instead of using a point. It can turn that round brush into a flat brush. Now this is the gouache. And if you want some cringe technique, here you go. I'm painting straight out of the tube. The reason I am is because I don't have any wash of my own. This was my daughter's, and it was kind of old, and the oil was separating from it. And I thought, you know, I just need it for this one thing. I don't want it to be too opaque. I don't want it to be too transparent. So at this point, I did add a little bit of water to it, because some areas had a shine that kind of blended in with the berry, and some areas had a very bright spot. So in some areas, I'm using it straight out of the tube, so it'll be more opaque. And then in some of the areas, I added a little bit of water to it so that it would be more transparent, because it wasn't a high shine on the berry. I'm also going to use her yellow and try to get a few stems in, but honestly, that yellow was too far gone. It was just too old, and I never could get exactly what I wanted, so we just called that good. Well, if you have made it to the end of the video, kudos to you, because this was another long one. I appreciate your being here. I always appreciate you guys being here, and your comments and your suggestions. Again, if you want to follow along, I will have that on my blog. The link will be below, and that will take you to the other things as well. I do not have Beatrix Potter's art on there. I only have my own reference photos and my own drawings. If there is something I've done in the past and you would like for me to put a drawing up, let me know and I will do that. And until then, I will see you in the next one.